We over the last few years, there's been sort of a almost like a cultural battle around the FBI and intelligence agencies. The FBI, much maligned by Donald Trump and Trumpists for its allegedly politically biased involvement in electoral politics, even though if you actually think back to 2016, the FBI's involvement may have been what handed Donald Trump a victory. Remember James Comey's second completely unnecessary press conference about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. But let's put that aside for now. Modern day, we have seen the FBI become a flashpoint of controversy, particularly in the context of the January 6 riots. There is now a blockbuster new investigation from the Washington Post, which shows that actually the FBI received very specific tips about the violence that was expected to happen on January 6th, which did, remember, the day of the Trump riots. But the FBI, as far as the Washington Post has uncovered, declined to act. This is stunning. This is stunning. Let's look at some of the information. A sprawling new investigation by the Washington Post into the events leading up to the Capitol insurrection has revealed that the FBI received numerous and highly detailed tips on the potential for serious violence by followers of then-President Donald Trump on January 6. And despite the specificity and volume of reports, the FBI largely dismissed the warnings. The fact that law enforcement of all stripes reportedly underestimated the likelihood of violence on January 6 has already been widely reported. But the Post's massive project started last spring, based on interviews of more than 230 people, describes in excruciating detail just how much was ignored. In one of the more shocking revelations, the Post recounts how information began flooding in to the FBI as early as December 6, when the agency received a tip about a message in an online post telling Trump supporters, please be in D.C. armed on the 6th. You might have to kill the palace guards. Are you okay with that? And indeed, there was violence against the so-called palace guards, U.S. Capitol Police, there to defend the Capitol. Another message reported by the Post stated, in an apparent reference to killing officers, drop a handful, the rest will flee, meaning kill a few U.S. Capitol Police, and then they're going to get out of our way. On December 19, Trump tweeted a message exhorting his followers to come to D.C. on January 6, writing, quote, big protest in D.C. on January 6. Be there, will be wild. That lit up online pro-Trump groups, and FBI informants quickly began passing on information about highly specific planning for a violent attack in Washington. Here's how the Post puts it. The FBI received a call alerting them to Trump supporters making plans online to bring arms to Washington and arrest lawmakers. The Sunday afternoon call was handled by the Bureau's National Threat Operations Center, a clearinghouse for tips about crimes, according to a document titled Threats to Take Guns and Overrun the D.C. Police January 4 to January 20th. It's almost like the 9/11 memo. Bin Laden poised to strike. Threats to take guns and overrun D.C. police. The file was updated the following afternoon by an FBI employee seeking to reclassify the information, more domestic terrorism than criminal in nature. They wanted to say, hey, this is almost not even just criminal. This is domestic terrorism. Criminal has received a number of guardians a significant number of guardians as a result of threats to Congress and other government officials. The caller, according to the FBI document, said people were planning on meeting in certain areas and sneaking guns into D.C. in an attempt to overrun the D.C. police, beginning January 4th through 20th. On 3 different sites, there is discussion about recruitment, where to meet at, bring guns, and arresting senators and members of Congress to hold trials outside in public areas. In one specific threat, Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney, often regarded by Trump supporters as a traitor to MAGA, was named as a target. Yet, despite all of this, on December 22nd, the Post says the FBI closed its internal threat assessment of the matter, determining it did not warrant further investigation at this time. An FBI official told the Post that before doing so, steps were taken to share the info, but ultimately the determination was made that the tips they received featured vague and primarily First Amendment protected speech. When we think back and we say, how were they not more ready? And why was the National Guard not deployed in advance and even as the Capitol was being overrun? And as we follow the chain of command upward, we learn that on the day of, it was Donald Trump who was reportedly gleefully watching the first couple of hours of the riots, maybe thinking it would actually prevent Joe Biden from ultimately being certified as president of the United States. Later, Trump started to not really like that the rioters looked low class and made him look bad. But the pressure was building for him to deploy the National Guard. He was told Mike Pence is potentially in danger. Mike Pence had to be evacuated. They were chanting, hang Mike Pence. But we know that Trump was actually mad at Mike Pence. Trump was furious that Pence wasn't willing to do what Trump believed Pence could do to really stop the certification of Joe Biden as president, even though Pence accurately told him, I can't do that, sir, I can't do that. And the calls built for Trump to call off the protesters and to send in the National Guard. And it was Trump who resisted doing that on January 6th. But this is a much broader backstory of a sort of hot potato that was being played behind the scenes. The FBI was, at the time that they could say this is criminal, not domestic terrorism, sort of letting the DC police know you might want to do something about this. The FBI was saying to Department of Justice, maybe you need to look into this and coordinate fencing or whatever the case may be. Capitol Hill police seemed not to actually even be told what the FBI was aware of. And then there was this last minute request for National Guard, which was initially resisted, although ultimately the National Guard was deployed. And there are some people who are writing, this is just like what happened on 9/11, where agencies couldn't communicate, they couldn't coordinate, there weren't systems in place. But this is actually a clearly different thing. After 9/11, systems were put in place so that different agencies could coordinate with each other. This seems more that there was a lack of willingness to do those things for reasons we don't yet totally know, and possibly because somebody ordered them to stand down. So I will now explain to you the more benign explanation and then the really horrible one. The more benign explanation here is the FBI genuinely didn't think that there was the potential for January 6th to become what it was. And they made a mistake in judgment. They didn't take it seriously enough. Now, what's interesting about that is that it would sort of run counter to the idea that the FBI and all of these intel agencies and others were out there to make Trump look as bad as possible and all these different things. It sounds like, if the FBI wanted to make Trump really bad, they would have publicized this in advance. They would have made Trumpists look bad, et cetera. They didn't do that. The sort of sinister possibility for which we don't yet have evidence, right? These are the speculative ideas, is that someone, once they caught wind that the FBI was receiving these threats, information about these threats, and starting to act on them, someone told the FBI, stand down. Turn this over to someone else, sort of, but don't really give them much information because we want the riots to be able to happen because we think maybe they actually will stop the certification of the election. We don't know the answer to that yet, but every week we are getting more and more information about the fact that many people, and by people we mean elected officials, associates of Trump, and law enforcement, had reason to fear that this was going to get really, really bad on January 6th, and it did. And the right preparations were not ultimately in place. At some point, we may know the full story. We still don't know it as of right now.